The podcast is Guide to the Conspiracy, featuring Auckland's Josh Addison and Bucharest's Dr. Matthew R. X. Dentith.
Hello, you're listening to the podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name's Josh Addison. I'm sitting at home in Auckland, New Zealand. His name's Dr. Matthew RX, I should say, Dentith, and he's sitting in his temporary abode in Bucharest, Romania.
Where it is quite humid.
Yeah.
Quite humid. It reminds me of
nice
home.
Change. Yeah, exactly.
No. Humidity is never a nice change. I don't like humidity. No. Humidity is one of the things I don't like about Auckland summers, or Auckland winters, or Auckland spring, or Auckland autumn. In fact, frankly, it's one of the things about Auckland weather I don't like at all.
I'm entirely with you on that. I understand you'll be heading back this way in a little while?
Yes, I return in September, and then all going to plan, I return back to Bucharest for 5 months in March of next year. So I shall be returning to my Eastern European paradise. Essentially, I get 3 summers in a row. I get a Romanian summer, an Auckland summer, and a Romanian summer, which makes up for the fact that I went through the coldest winter of my life here. Because people who don't know New Zealand probably don't realise that in the region that we come from, Auckland, it never really gets that cold in winter. We complain about it getting cold in winter, but it doesn't actually get cold it snows and there's ice everywhere.
Standards, no. Yes.
And so, to my mind, as someone who's mostly lived in Auckland most of their life, a Romanian winter is really quite cold, and I feel as if I've had enough winter to keep me going for about 2 years. So 3 summers in a row, a-okay with me.
Yes, I have wintered in Europe and had the interesting sensation of walking out on a misty morning and feeling frost condensing in my beard. I don't know. I kind of like a cold. But of course, the problem with New Zealand is that the weather, it's hot but not too hot, and cold but not insanely cold, which means we don't bother to insulate our houses properly, and we don't bother with air conditioning. So in the middle of summer, we're actually probably a lot more sticky and uncomfortable than people who live in places where it's really hot because they have proper air conditioning. And in the middle of winter, we're shivering in our poorly insulated houses, whereas people who have real winters live in houses with proper central heating. So it's all a little bit funny.
Yes, and
actually, but enough of the weather.
I was about to say that's one thing which I won't. Actually, one thing I will miss about winter in Romania, I was able to be in just normal pants and a t-shirt in my house in winter the entire time. I never needed to put on an additional layer. Whilst back home, Skyping people as I do, you see people wearing 3 or 4 layers at this point in time of the year because the houses are cold and heaters do nothing. They do nothing.
Just to clarify, we're using pants in the British sense of the word to mean underpants, or the sort of more American sense of the word to mean trousers. Just want to get a proper mental picture of you.
I'm using the Antipodean notion that pants refers to both, so therefore it's ambiguous.
There you go. Yep, no, that works for me. Well, we have an interesting. I think it's an interesting topic this week, and it has nothing to do with current events or anything like that. Which is good because first we need to talk about actual current events. So there'll be a clear demarcation between the two. Shall we get into the news?
Let's say between the fantastical and the fantastical.
Yes, between the current and the... I don't even care. But play the chime.
Play the chime.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
Right, so a subject close to your heart, Matthew. There's been more goings on it's been the last couple of weeks now, I think, with more people talking about the fact that there were European-ish people in New Zealand before the Maori got here.
Allegedly,
yeah. Yes. And the interesting thing, the latest development in this, who is the guy who we've talked about before, who's written books and stuff?
Max Hill, which is not the same person as Noel Hilliam, who we're about to talk about, although Noel Hilliam was credited as helping write To the End of the Earth, the book by Max Hill, that claims that the Greeks and the Egyptians in antiquity made it all the way to Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Yes, so we're not talking about the guy who wrote the stuff we talked about before. We're talking about a different guy who claims that he took some ancient skulls and sent them off to some forensic person or other who did a facial reconstruction thingy on them and came up with some suspiciously European-looking faces. Case closed, Matthew. Case closed.
Yeah, so Noel Hilliam has been on the Europeans got to Aotearoa New Zealand first bandwagon for a while. He, at one stage, was actually working as the director for a museum in Dargaville, and that caused controversy because he had exhibits about these pre-Maori Europeans in the museum, which of course caused consternation for the iwi that lives around Dargaville, and also marine biologists, archaeologists, and the like are all going, none of this kind of makes any sense, Noel. The evidence that you're citing here makes no sense in any way, shape, or form. I didn't actually mean to say marine biologists there. I mean to say marine archaeologists, although I'm sure marine biologists also have issues
Probably comes
with this.
into it.
Yeah. But so the reason why I say marine archaeologists there is that Noel Hilliam's other thing, apart from trying to prove the Europeans got to New Zealand first, is also looking for shipwrecks off the coast of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So he's got two interests, finding old shipwrecks and proving that Maori weren't the first people in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, he's been trying to find actual evidence for these claims for a while, and so now has claimed that he took two skulls from a burial ground, sent them to Edinburgh to a pathologist working at the university there, and the pathologist was somehow able to do facial reconstruction on the skulls, and from that infer that one of the skulls came from a person in Wales, whom he names Henrietta, and the other comes from somewhere in the Mediterranean. Now, every biologist and every archaeologist who has looked at this particular report has gone, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, you can't tell from a single skull what racial group they belong to because there's a high
Now, hang on
degree
a
of
second.
difference.
Hang on, Matthew. I have to stop you there because I once saw an episode of MacGyver where he took a skull and chopped the erasers off a bunch of pencils and melted them down for rubber and reconstructed it, and it looked exactly like Penny Parker, which proved that it was her aunt's skull. So don't tell me that you can't exactly find the precise facial features of a skull using facial reconstruction technique because you're calling MacGyver a liar, Matthew. Are you calling MacGyver a liar? Is that what you're doing?
Unfortunately, yes, for fans of Richard Dean Anderson, I am claiming that that particular plot point in that episode was more fantasy than reality.
Well, frankly, I'm crushed, Matthew. You've destroyed most of my world. You might as well go and carry on with the rest of it.
And also, a warning to the curious, don't go back and rewatch MacGyver. It has not stood up to the test of time.
No, I don't know if it did at the time, really. Like, the first season or so was great, but I remember getting quite bored of it a few seasons in as well. But
Enough
at
about
any
MacGyver.
rate,
Yeah.
enough about MacGyver, yes. We could talk about him all night, but we will restrain ourselves from doing so.
So there's this ongoing controversy here about these skulls. There's also the issue of where do you find the skulls? Does he actually know at what point in time they were deposited? Because if it turns out the forensic pathologist could make a determination that the skulls belong to someone from Wales and from the Mediterranean, you then need to know, well, how old are the skulls? If the skulls are only 100 years old, then that might make sense. So there's nothing in the story that tells us that these are ancient skulls going back, say, 3,000 years, like Hilliam wants to claim. So there's a lot of questions here. There's been some follow-up work. Someone from Vice New Zealand, Tess McClure, actually got in contact with the University of Edinburgh and said, look, do you know anyone who's working in forensic pathology that would have done this test? And everyone at Edinburgh went, we are not aware of anyone at the University of Edinburgh being involved with Noel Hilliam and these tests. And then they kind of were condemning of the notion that people would be sending skulls to the UK, given that they are a prohibited item for trade or travel across international borders. And this has also led to an issue back home, which is Noel Hilliam appears to have engaged in grave robbery, which is against the law in New Zealand. And he's even admitted that he has taken skulls from graves, but feels that the law is unfair because it's hindering his chances to prove that Europeans got here first. So he claims that the law is basically a conspiracy by the Crown of New Zealand, along with Maori, to hide the evidence that Europeans were in New Zealand first. So this is an ongoing issue.
Yes, I mean, when people said, "Hang on, so you dug up a sacred burial site," that's quite a severe transgression to do to a historical Maori site. And he said, well, but obviously it's not a historical Maori site, and I'm not digging up Maori skulls, I'm digging up ancient Westerner skulls. So yes,
Which,
it
as
all
an
looks a little
argument,
shaky.
doesn't really work for the sheer fact
No.
that to prove that they're non-Maori skulls, he has to dig them up and then do tests upon them. And the presumption is we know Maori were here before the current crop of Europeans, so it's actually more plausible to believe that any pre-colonization burial ground is going to be Maori in character. So his argument doesn't really hold water. But then again, most of his views don't really hold water, apart from possibly his search for shipwrecks, which of course don't hold water because they're beneath the waves. That was a very
Nicely
poor.
done, Matthew.
I don't
Right.
know. Really?
I thought you built up to it quite nicely, and
Yeah.
I just capped it off with a nice little pun. Yeah. But yes, no, the whole thing does seem to right from the fundamentals of it rest on the notion that you can take a skull and find out exactly what that person looked like, down to ethnically specific facial features. And of course the sketches which were provided included like a woman with blonde hair. There's no way you can tell anything about hair color from a from a skull.
You could.
You
if
can
there were
infer,
skin,
but you
yeah,
couldn't.
if there were
Yeah.
skin fragments and hair fragments associated with the burial, then you might be able to make that determination.
But from the sounds of things, it was based purely on an ancient skull.
Yeah, basically. So, yes. What is interesting, this piece was published in the Northland Advocate, which is a regional newspaper published by the Fairfax Press. After people made complaints about the article, it has completely disappeared online. So you cannot find the article in question now. And it disappeared for the quite valid reason that the reporter who wrote the story was completely uncritical in the presentation of the piece. And people have gone, if you're going to make contentious claims that Europeans got here before the Maori, you can't simply take the word of the one person who believes this and then not have a dissenting voice like an archaeologist or an historian. That's not good balanced reporting. So yeah, it's a very interesting story.
It is. As is the next thing, the story of Seth Rich. I almost wonder if we should have devoted an episode to this before now, but it sounds like the story is winding down. And also it's an old one. I mean, I'm pretty sure we've never mentioned him before on this podcast, even though the event that it pertains to happened almost a year ago now. And it's only just been in the last couple of weeks that I've been hearing about Seth Rich. You have your ear a little closer to the ground when it comes to conspiracy theories. Have you been aware of the whole Seth Rich conspiracy since it began, or just recently?
So there have been a few rumbles about Seth Rich. So Seth Rich was a DNC staffer who was shot in the street in Washington, D.C. last July and died in hospital. The police treated it as a botched mugging. And there's always been a little bit of suspicion by certain people on the right that Seth Rich was the source of the DNC leaks. So this is the notion that it wasn't WikiLeaks, it wasn't the Russians, it was an insider who leaked information to the public, which inadvertently supported the Republican nominee Donald Trump to become president of the United States. But it kind of remained a minor story because the Russia hypothesis just seems so well evidenced and so well supported by everything else we knew. And then in the last few weeks, suddenly the Seth Rich story has become really, really big. And it's become really big because certain people like Sean Hannity have been talking about it on Fox News. And it's also become big because our own Kim.com has been talking about it, claiming that he's got evidence that Seth Rich was in fact the person who leaked the information to the public about the DNC emails.
Yes, I mean it's a claim that has been circulating for a while, kind of in the old Clinton body count way, in that you know a person associated with the Democratic campaign dies. Oh, the Clintons must have been behind it. That same sort of thing. As far as I'm aware, there's no actual evidence to suggest this was anything other than a mugging gone wrong. The police don't believe it was any more than that. Seth Rich's family don't believe it was any more than that, and have recently been quite vocal in asking people to stop spreading these conspiracy theories, please. But I believe most recently it came about when some private investigator who claimed to have been hired by the Rich family was on TV throwing these conspiracy theories around, and then backed down fairly quickly when asked to provide actual evidence from them, as far as I understand. But yes, old Sean Hannity has taken it as his number one cause at the moment. And just in the last day or so has started losing advertisers, and I believe is as of today on a 2-day holiday or taking a break or something. So people are wondering if he's going to go the full way of Bill O'Reilly, or whether this is just going to sort of blow over. The story about it on the Fox News website has been pulled down, citing it wasn't up to our journalistic standards and so on. But then yes, there's the whole Julian Assange darkly hinting that he knew what was going on, and then yes, Kim.com saying he's certain that Seth Rich was the DNC email leak. But again, it's still, everything I've heard has just been in the realm of innuendo. It's been, all that Kim.com has said so far on record is that he has communicated online with a person going by the name of Panda, and he is now certain that Panda is Seth Rich, and they were talking about government stuff. But he is yet to make the claim that I'm talking to someone who I'm sure is Seth Rich online, and he told me he was the DNC leak, or and he gave me good reason to believe that. Claims that he was going to come up with evidence for it, and then there's been a slight bit of dodginess just in the last day or two with Seth Rich's family finding emails showing up in Seth Rich's old Gmail account suggesting that someone was maybe trying to hack into it.
Using mega.nz, Kim.com,
yes,
file sharing
Kim.com's website.
service. Yeah.
So a counter-conspiracy theory has since sprung up suggesting that Kim.com was trying to hack into Seth Richard's email to plant fake evidence that would be used to prove that he was the WikiLeaks or not the WikiLeaks, the leak of the DNC emails. So, but yeah, like I say, just in the last couple of days, it's sort of blown up and then looks to be going away quite quickly. But quite frankly, who knows at this point? It's been a little bit all over the place.
So a quick point on the Kim.com issue, because some people might be thinking, why would Kim.com want to break into someone's email account to plant evidence? The reason why people are suspicious about Kim.com's motives here is that during the election in 2014 in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Kim.com claimed he had evidence that the then Prime Minister John Key had colluded with the heads of Hollywood to create a situation to allow Kim.com to be extradited to the United States. And his evidence was an email which he basically revealed 2 weeks before the election. It was very close to the election.
It was something
date,
like
wasn't
that.
it?
It was his, what was it? It was his
moment of truth.
Yeah, it was a big event, essentially.
And people
ironically,
saw
him trying
the
to sway
email
the results of our election.
and concluded that it was quite obviously false. It had been created to give the impression that John Key was engaging in dodgy behavior with the heads of Hollywood, but everything about the email simply didn't ring true. So people are suspicious that Kim.com is the kind of person who will claim he's got evidence based upon hunches he has, and then when it comes to providing the evidence is a little bit slippery with the truth. Actually, although the theory that fascinates me more, which is the conspiracy theory about why Fox News has been so hard on pressing the Seth Rich story, is that it's the perfect antidote to the ongoing discussion about discussion. It's a new word. Discussion about the Russian.
The Russian discussion.
Yeah,
there you go.
There we go.
Well, it works and rhymes.
Yeah, it sounds as if it should be a proper Russian information discussion, a false discussion. Actually, I might stick with that on the notion that every other news network has been, by and large, treating the investigation of potential collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia seriously, and Fox is the only news network which basically has been saying it's a non-issue, and we should be looking at this thing, and this thing. And the Seth Rich story ended up being a convenient, now this is a real scandal, somebody died hypothesis, as if someone has to die for us to treat a claim of conspiracy seriously.
Yes, yeah. And if they can, if they were able to show that the source of the leaks definitely didn't come from Russia, then that would put a serious damper on that whole story. Speaking of Julian Assange, he is no longer wanted for questioning, is he?
That's correct. The Swedish
Is it a statute of
prosecutor-
limitations thing?
Yeah, so they decided not to renew the investigation. So he had been wanted at that point for questioning in Stockholm about the events that occurred over 8 years ago now.
It's been a while, yes.
And the Swedes have decided to not renew the investigation. So formally, there is no active investigation against Assange in Sweden anymore. Of course, the British are still interested in talking to him because he skipped bail. So the fact that there is no active investigation against him doesn't mean he can suddenly leave the Ecuadorian embassy, because the British government can say, well, at the same time you broke the law here because you skipped bail on us, and that is an offence separate from whatever you were being investigated for, and we need to talk to you about that because you've broken the law in the UK. But Assange is now saying that because the Swedish investigation has been dropped, he's been vindicated, which is clearly not obviously
Not really true. No.
And he's also saying that the British should just let him go to Ecuador to live his life of exile as he wants. And the British are going, no, but you still broke the law here. You just don't get to have it your way because you sit in a room for 8 years hoping the problem is going to disappear. You've broken the law.
Yes, he has. Now, just to round things out, we have a few updates to previous
Oh,
stories.
no.
So the Orrin Hatch...
No. We haven't
Oh, no?
talked about the conceptual
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. I skipped the conceptual penis. Good God.
I can't believe you
The
skipped
penis
a
totally slipped my mind.
Oh, those slippery penises.
Those slippery penises.
So this is an interesting story here. So people may be aware that late last week, early this week, there was a story making the rounds initiating? Original? My English language skills seem so lackluster today. Originating from Skeptic magazine, a magazine edited by Michael Shermer, about two academics, a philosopher and a mathematician, Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay, who wrote a piece called The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct and tried to submit it to gender theory journals in order to prove that gender theories, gender studies, is basically a false discipline, bad academia driven by notions that male privilege is bad, etc., etc. Now,
except any old claptrap that you
basically
submit to them, as long as it has the right tone, yes.
So it appears to be a version of the Sokal hoax of several years ago. Now, this has been presented by Skeptic as proof positive that gender studies is basically a crock. Now, what it actually shows is quite interesting, because I think it actually shows a conspiracy in the publishing world as opposed to a conspiracy in the specific field of gender studies, because Boghossian and Lindsay weren't able to get their piece into a gender studies journal. So they picked a really, really, really low-hanging fruit by picking a very lowly ranked journal in the field, and the paper got rejected. So the editors went, this isn't very good, so sorry, reject. But because it was a Taylor and Francis journal, Taylor and Francis immediately emailed them to say, well, you've been rejected by this journal, but why not try one of our open access journals like Cogenta instead, which is a pay-to-publish journal. So Boghossian and Lindsay were able to get their paper published in a journal which has lax peer review, to virtually some people would say non-existent peer review, on the premise that they would pay a fee. Now, the fee is usually, I think, 1,325 US, but the journal, which is so desperate to get entries, is willing to negotiate down. So apparently they were going to pay something like 625. It turns out they didn't pay anything whatsoever. But they're claiming the fact that they got their paper into a Taylor and Francis journal shows that gender studies is in fact a fraud. But as other academics have pointed out, Kagenta is not a journal that deals with gender studies at all. None of the editors are involved in gender studies. It's a predatory journal that takes papers that have failed the peer review process elsewhere and publishes them if you're willing to pay a fee. And so what they've actually shown is that there is a kind of conspiracy in the academic journal market, which is you can write a really, really bad paper and you can still get it published as long as you're willing to pay a little bit of money. And the fact that there's a relationship between these predatory journals and big journal publishers who publish legitimate, high-ranked journals owned by Taylor and Francis is a fairly disturbing thing, although, as people have pointed out, we've known about this for a while.
Right. So, penis is out of the way. Now can we talk about a few last little updates?
We can.
I do. So, the other week, we had something about the fact that Orrin Hatch is third in line to be president, and at the time he was the designated survivor, and this was taken to be a big deal. So it turns out that's true.
Yes, he is in fact third in line to the president. So after Pence and Ryan, Orrin Hatch would be the next person to become president. So he was the designated survivor at the inauguration, and at the time we're not entirely sure that makes him necessarily third in line to the presidency just because he was a designated survivor at the time. But yes, he is the third most senior after Trump in the executive and would become president should Trump, Pence, and Ryan fall. So.
We know.
Yeah, our hypothesis that maybe that wasn't the case, actually it was the case. And so we sit corrected at this point in time.
Yes, we do. Following up to the story about Alex Jones taking on Big Yogurt, I believe Big Yogurt won, or at least Jones backed down.
Yeah, so Alex Jones said he was going to die on a hill to show that Chobeni were engaged in predatory practices, bringing in rapists to this small town, has issued an apology and said he was wrong to make those claims. So the hill he said he would die on, he retreated from.
Making him 0 for 2 in recent court outings. And finally, sticking on the subject, I suppose, InfoWars, who we've talked in the past about wanting to get press credentials, they've got what they wanted, as far as I understand.
Yes, so Alex Jones may have lost in court twice, but now his news outlet, InfoWars, has a press pass to the White House. This is the world we live in now.
It sure is. Well, that's a slightly depressing way to end a look at the current state of the world. How about we talk about something else completely different?
Yes, let's move to Red Mars.
Something like that. So, today we're going to talk about Red Mercury.
Not Red Mars?
Not Red Mars, no, Red Mercury.
What about Red Planet?
No Red Planet even. No, purely
What
Mercury
about Mars,
of the red variety.
starring Olivia Gruner?
Not even Mars starring, no. Which was the Val Kilmer, Carrie-Anne Moss one? That was Red Planet, wasn't it?
It was. I've already
And
mentioned
then-
Red Planet. You had your chance to make a
Yes.
Val Kilmer joke at that point, and you missed it.
But the other one with Gary Sinise and then was Mission to Mars?
It was indeed.
Awful film.
Although
is why we're
we
not gonna
have
talk about
friends who quite like it.
Do
in
we?
a kind of it. Yeah, I'm fairly sure Richard has a thing for Mission to Mars.
Oh well, he's clearly damaged in the brains. Possibly from inhaling mercury vapors, who knows? Wouldn't put it past him. But no, we're here to talk about Red Mercury. Red Mercury is, depending on who you listen to, the philosopher's stone of terrorist armaments, or a hoax and a scam perpetrated by con men or a fishy government sting operation. Red mercury is a magical substance that people have been talking about since around the 1980s, which apparently allows you to do all sorts of amazing and mythical things. The thing that it's most talked about being able to do is allow you to produce easily very, very small, compact nuclear weapons, the sort of a nuclear bomb that would fit in a briefcase or a handbag or some tiny little thing that any old terrorist could carry around with themselves anywhere and detonate and blow us all up. It's apparently this spectacular substance which somehow can be used relatively easily, I guess, since supposedly low-budget terrorist organizations reckon they can get their hands on it, to produce all manner of armaments. People started talking about it in the 1980s, and apparently the term Red Mercury, the red originally referred to, was red as in communists. It was called Red Mercury because the Russians used it, not because it was literally red in color, although these days when people talk about it, they seem to talk about it being red, actually red. Since the sort of the fall of communism, when the Soviet Union broke up, what do you mean Evernote has stopped? Evernote is telling me everything that I need to say. Curse you, tablet.
Well, I should point out in this small break, it sounds like Red Mercury is the nanothermite
really
of the Cold
does.
War.
Yeah. So just not relying on my electronic backup memory for the moment until my tablet starts behaving. It was first talked about in the 1980s, after the fall of communism, sort of around in the 90s. That was when sort of the arms dealers started talking about it, when you had all these stories of armaments coming out of Russia, after everything started to collapse, people smuggling arms out and then selling them on the black market and so on. That's when...
Which is also the point in time where you start getting a lot of hypothesizing about secret Russian weapons developed during the Cold War
these secret
that
things we
no
never heard
one
about.
knew anything about. So the idea that after the fall of communist Russia, that there'd be all of these secret bits of technology leaking out into the world probably supported the idea that there'd be this mysterious red mercury.
Okay, what is your... I've restarted my tablet and it's not working with you. It's all gone horribly wrong. Okay, whatever. So it has, it's you've had these arms dealers, these shady individuals, talking up this magical substance that they can put you in touch with a guy who knows a guy, and he'll get you this red mercury, and you terrorist operative will then be able to make all the little miniature nuclear bombs you need. Supposedly, depending on who you talk to, it is supposedly a highly potent explosive in and of itself, so you could use it just by itself to make conventional bombs. According to some people, it can be used in the uranium enrichment process to create nuclear-grade plutonium. According to other people, it can be used in a nuclear bomb itself. My understanding is with nuclear bombs, you have nuclear bombs, or which are the ones they call A-bombs, and that's a pure nuclear fission reaction, usually caused by jamming bits of plutonium together to form a supercritical mass, and which creates the fission chain reaction. Then you get the thermonuclear weapons, or H-bombs, in which a fission reaction sets off a fusion reaction, which makes an even bigger explosion. And there have been suggestion that red mercury is a potent enough explosion that you can actually substitute it entirely for plutonium, or use it to generate the fission reaction to set off the fusion reaction of an H-bomb. And then beyond that, beyond nuclear armaments, people have talked about it as being something that you can use to produce stealth paint, the sort of paint that you can paint your vehicles and aircraft with to render them invisible to radar. People have talked about it being involved in the construction of missiles, self-guided missiles, and so on. That's a little bit more vague. I don't know whether it's something used by the missiles themselves or just the explosive warheads in the missiles and so on and so forth. It really is the most magical of things.
And I suppose it's because it has all of these different and what appear to be quite variant properties, that's what makes people suspicious about it. So if red mercury was simply put forward as a compound you can add to an explosive to make the explosive more powerful, people might go, well, that seems like something that could have been developed by the Soviets during the Cold War. So maybe there is such a thing as red mercury. But when it suddenly also works as a paint for making your vehicles more stealthy, or can be used in cruise missiles to make them more accurate, you end up going, this red mercury appears to be all things to all people, which suddenly makes you think that either there are lots of things under the umbrella of red mercury, or red mercury is kind of a spectre, an explanation for things in the world that when you actually prod it and test it, turns out to be simply a flimsy hypothesis.
Yes, I mean that immediately makes one suspicious of it when you have something that so many claims and so varied claims start being made about a substance. It doesn't, like, just chemically there couldn't be a substance that could be put to all of those uses. But of course you could just reply to that and say, well, okay, yes, the stories have been embellished on and added and mistakes and so on, but there is still a thing that maybe performs one of these purposes. But again, because it's so vague, no one exactly knows what it is, where in the process it's used for and so on. It's all a little bit dodgy, but that hasn't stopped people from talking about it. So back in the 90s, I believe it was the Russian media published stories about that, and then the BBC, in fact, produced a couple of documentaries about this mysterious substance. My notes are still dead, Matthew. Can you tell me the names of those documentaries?
Trail of Red Mercury and Pocket Neutron.
There we go, yes. So
And
these
it wasn't
two ones.
the BBC, it was Britain's Channel 4,
Oh, I
not the BBC.
apologise. There we go. Yes, which were, so mainstream media did actually talk about this mysterious thing, but then, as, oh, here's this nasty substance, and if terrorists got their hands on it, you better watch out. The scientific community has been less enthusiastic. The one name that I've seen coming up a bit was the Samuel T. Cohen fellow, who was a bona fide scientist. He was involved in the Manhattan Project. In his autobiography, he talked about red mercury and it being this nasty substance that detonates at enormously high temperatures and with much explosiveness. And he apparently cited those Channel 4 documentaries and showed they were sort of evidence of his concerns. But the scientific community at large has said, nah, not really going to have a bar of it. And I think when you ask anyone who actually knows anything about anything, the consensus is no, red mercury, it just plain doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting story for the sheer fact that, as I said previously, the idea that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, mysterious technology would start to emerge. And we certainly know that the Russians were involved in some very interesting experiments, particularly around the use of telepathy and remote viewing, something which the Americans engaged in as well. So it seemed plausible to think in the 80s that if there were mysterious weapons developed by the Soviets during the Cold War, then the disbanding of the Soviet Union would mean that these weapons would make their way into small countries on the fringes of the former Soviet Union, or be sold off to terrorists and the like. So certainly people were very interested in finding out, what secrets were the Soviets keeping from us at that particular point in time. But red mercury seems to do, as we've said, too many things for it to be a plausible compound on its own.
Yes, so it's basically regarded with skepticism by anyone in the know, to the point that the US cables that were released by WikiLeaks some years ago, in them you can actually find correspondence between the State Department, the US State Department, and other countries where I think it was Malaysia from memory, sent a message to the US saying, now look, we've got these people here, these arms dealers in our country are supposedly selling red mercury, that's maybe something we need to look out for. And the State Department's reply was, no, you don't need to worry about that. We know about red mercury. It's a well-known hoax. You can ignore that. It's fine. I think the most sort of plausible thing people have come up with is that perhaps red mercury, rather than being a substance with some relation to mercury and so on was simply a code name. And people have suggested that perhaps it was a code name for lithium-6, I think it was, which is a substance that is used at one point in the manufacture of nuclear weapons. Apparently, it can also appear red when it's mixed with certain other compounds or something. So, maybe people have just heard a sexy-sounding code name and run with it. And run with it they have, because as we've already suggested, the stories about Red Mercury over time have just grown and grown and grown and grown. The number of things you can supposedly do with it are quite remarkable. The stories have expanded to talk about different kinds of mercury, or rather
green
red
mercury,
green mercury,
dark
which
mercury, hot and cold mercury, doppio mercury, mercury with a shot of milk. There's all kinds of different mercury out there.
yeah, supposedly have all these different substances. So I've sort of read people talking very earnestly about, so it comes, there's the red mercury, but then there's hot mercury and cold, and only the hot variety can be used in nuclear weapons. That's why it's so much rarer. And then other interesting stories started circulating about where one might find red mercury. There were stories that that Russia, in order to get its precious red mercury out, smuggle it out of the country, it started it would lace certain certain objects with red mercury that would then be sold, these innocuous objects, and then the red mercury could be harvested from them later. So for some reason in Saudi Arabia, it was Singer sewing machines supposedly had red mercury used in their needles or something, and you could extract red mercury from sewing machines. And so there was a brief fad where Singer brand sewing machines suddenly became, you could sell them to people in the know for ridiculous amounts of money. Which was all just a little bit silly and reminiscent of the tulip craze in Egypt and that sort of thing. Not Egypt, Europe, centuries ago. One that had slightly more unfortunate consequences when rumours started circulating that certain types of explosives in Africa contained this red mercury that could be very valuable to the right person. A rumour which unfortunately has resulted in actual deaths and injuries, as people who didn't really know what they were doing started digging up landmines and tinkering with explosives, trying to take them apart to find this super valuable red mercury inside, and instead ended up detonating them and killing or injuring themselves. So the stories grow and grow and grow. Then of course, to account for the fact that if people want to buy red mercury, there are people out there saying, hey, I've got lots of money to give to anyone who'll give me red mercury. That's going to get people saying, really? And so I certainly happen to have some red mercury. Would you like to give me lots of money for it? And so start, mixing red lipstick in with real mercury to give it a red color or something. So on top of the idea that whether or not red mercury is a hoax altogether, you get actual red mercury hoaxes of people selling stuff they know damn well isn't it. And so then you get all these stories about tests you can perform, supposedly. Yes, red mercury. What is it? It's attracted to gold but repelled by Gallic. So red mercury is a vampire that likes a bit of bling. I can understand. Well, actually, I can't understand, but I can find. I'm trying to work out the right words here. I can see the gold thing. So yes, maybe there's a certain property in red mercury, which means that if there's gold nearby, it's magnetically attracted to it or something. I don't know. But the repelled by Gallic thing. That just seems weird. That sounds like somebody's.
Are you saying that we could build barriers against red mercury bombs by putting satellites filled with Gallic into space, or covering buildings with Gallic? Yes, yes. Now our building is red mercury
proof. Yes. No, pretty sure they're thinking of vampires there. But yeah, so in terms of actual conspiracies, I mean, first of all, we have the idea that red mercury is just plain a scam, that various people are preying on the perhaps desperation, might be a suitable word, of terrorist groups who really want to get an edge on their enemies but don't have the resources. And so therefore are deliberately spreading these rumors in an attempt to profit from them. But then beyond that, people have suggested that it might be some sort of a government conspiracy, that yes, Red Mercury is a complete hoax, but the existence of it, these rumours have been put about by governments, either for sort of sting operations, so that they cook up this completely false substance, so that they can then try to get people interested in, find terrorists who want to buy their magical armament manufacturing substance, and they can do all that without actually having to put real weapons or anything like that on the line. Or indeed that it's rumours that have been spread out by governments purely to waste terrorists' time, to send terrorists off on a wild goose chase looking for this magical red mercury substance. Well, if they're doing that, it means they're not buying real weapons from other arms dealers and so on.
Yeah, and it makes it really easy to then track international networks, because if you have this particular term, red mercury, which is not going to occur naturally, then it's easy to then go, oh, who are these people looking for red mercury? There'll be the class of people who simply want to look up red mercury online to find out whether it exists, and then there'll be the class of people who persistently talk about trying to purchase red mercury. Where can I get red mercury from? Which will then make it easier for members of various intelligence services to then go, we should probably keep an eye on this person, because this person appears to be looking for an ingredient to either make their vessel go invisible or make a really, really large bomb. And in both cases, if they're not a member of our government, we probably should make sure that they don't find anything that they need.
Yes, exactly. If they're looking for this, if we know they're looking for this fake weapon, then chances are they'd be quite happy to receive real ones as well. So yes, a person to keep an eye on. I think at the end of the day, though, the biggest refutation of the existence of red mercury is that there is no record of any sort of red mercury enhanced weapon being used by anyone anywhere ever. There have been stories that Syria had a bunch of red mercury warheads. Well, if they did, why the hell haven't they used them in the war that's been going on there for years and years and years? It's if it's been around since the 80s, if there are people who are willing to sell it, if there are people who are willing to buy it and want to put it to use, why has that never happened yet?
It certainly does raise a big question, because at least with the nanothermite discussion, we know that the military is trying to develop and kind of nanothermite. And at least people will say, well, look, we can point towards 9/11 as a putative use of nanothermite for the destruction of the Twin Towers, whilst it's very hard to find any even vaguely credible story about red mercury being used. I mean, on occasion, people talk about red mercury having been mixed in with chlorine to make a particularly noxious gas as a weapon of mass destruction. But of course, the problem is chlorine is itself a poison. So any chlorine attack can be explained by the fact that chlorine is in fact a poison. You don't need to add red mercury to make chlorine poisonous. Chlorine does that by itself.
I can attest to that personally, to be quite honest. As a teenager, I went on a school trip to a water slide park, and there was a chlorine. It was a chlorine in swimming pools and so on for sterilization or disinfecting, whatever you want to call it. Yes, there was a chlorine leak on the water slide, the tubular sort of water slides, which I only found out about after I'd been down one. So I've been exposed to chlorine gas. Fortunately, only for the length of time it takes to get from the top of a water slide to the bottom. As I understand, chlorine's one of those gases that it interferes, it bonds to your lungs so that your lungs can't accept oxygen or something like that. So the experience, yes, inhaling chlorine gas basically means you take a great big breath, cough out the entire contents of your lungs, then take in another great big breath and cough all that out again as well. It was quite an unpleasant experience, and I can imagine. I'm told that dying of chlorine poisoning feels like drowning, which I could certainly believe, because it's like you're breathing, but you're not breathing. But yes, these stories. there are, despite all the points that we've raised, there are apparently still people out there who are determined to believe that Red Mercury exists. Which, when we're talking about scams and cons and hoaxes, is the kind of thing. Once it's a well-known phenomenon that once people get sucked in a certain length into a con, they have a vested interest in continuing to believe it, if only for sort of psychological reasons. They don't want to admit that they've come this far, only for it all to be a hoax, so they're willing to cling to anything. So that's when we get these stories of all the different varieties and the wacky ways of finding it. And yes, this story is about, oh yes, no, it's true, I've seen it with my very own eyes. It's this person right in front of me used red mercury to turn a poisonous gas into a poisonous gas.
So it reminds me ever so slightly about the Christopher Hitchens story with respect to weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So Hitchens was a long-time supporter that the invasion of Iraq was justified at the time because he felt there was credible evidence that there were weapons of mass destruction being developed by the Saddam Hussein regime. And he continued to maintain that the evidence was credible even when the rest of the world went, yeah, we were kind of sold a sham. And Hitchens at one point even claimed to have seen this credible evidence for the weapons of mass destruction. And given that no one else, including CIA operatives, claimed to have seen this evidence, you have to feel that Hitchens got so committed to the notion that there was credible evidence for weapons of mass destruction that he had to kind of engage in a lie to continue justifying his particular position.
So, my tablet is still refusing to behave itself, so I've been doing all of this from memory so far, and I think I've run out of my recollection of everything that was down in our notes. Is there anything else we have to talk about regarding Red Mercury, Matthew?
No, not really. You have done, to quote Blade Runner, a man's job.
Oh, very good. Fortunately for me, I was compiling these notes just in the last couple of days, so it was all fresh in the mind. But yeah, it's an interesting story about an interesting substance and the interesting people who are after it. And just goes to show how conspiracy theories can, propagate around what appears to be complete nonsense in the first place, but also sort of, have groundings in truth in that it's entirely possible that governments didn't actually start the Red Mercury stuff, but are perfectly willing to use these rumors as they're out there in a sting operation or something like that. You can always find some sort of grounding in reality, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe it just helps these sorts of things propagate.
Yeah, I suppose actually that does raise an interesting question. So if we hypothesize that Red Mercury was, say, an initial misunderstanding or a code word used by someone to describe some other substance, and then over time Red Mercury took on all these other qualities of being able to do this thing and this thing and this thing, it would have been interesting to see how intelligence services in another country kind of came to the conclusion that actually there is no Red Mercury. We've investigated it now, it turns out it doesn't exist. And how they came to that conclusion, how did they get to the point where they go, well, we don't think there is such a thing as Red Mercury. But at the same time, now that we know that other people believe it, we can then use that to our own advantage. That sounds like a really interesting story, one which we'll probably either never know about or under official information access requests probably know about in 25 years' time, which if the podcast is still going by that point, maybe we'll have a follow-up episode at that particular point there. I wonder what podcasting will be like in 25 years' time.
I assume it'll just inject directly into your brain and like you just do it and then you just absorb the knowledge subcutaneously.
So there'll be a kind of AI version of you and an AI version of me, and they'll exist in people's meat spaces, and they'll have these conversations based upon the evidence at hand and the AI model of how we would deal with the situation.
Something like that. Virtual reality will be involved, I'm sure, and smart surfaces and the Internet of Things.
That's never going to catch on.
No, it doesn't really seem like it.
Or at least the current generation of VR, I think, is another dead end.
No, it does seem like a very good way of, a very expensive way of making yourself vomit, from what I hear. Interesting applications, vomit. I'm sure, but yes. So,
VR, it's the Red Mercury of gaming.
That's exactly what it is. I'm Josh Addison and I approve this statement. So, I think we've come to the end of an episode. Am I correct?
We have indeed.
Hmm.
We have indeed. There's only one thing for it. The usual, let's get some contact details out of the way, even though they'll be appearing during the music, and then announcing the music, and then going out on a song.
But why don't you do that, Matthew? I think I've done the bulk of the talking this episode. Give the listeners another dose of your dulcet tones.
Well, yes, in a few minutes' time, you'll be hearing contact deals. Contact deals? Oh dear. See, the reason why you've done all the talking this episode is my English language skills seem to have taken a drastic... See, I don't even know how to finish the sentence.
Dive?
I was about to say
Degradation,
jump. I don't know why I was going to go jump.
Jump off a cliff.
Jump.
And then, I don't know.
Yeah. English bad, speak me. So yes, in a moment's time, you'll be hearing contact deals. See, I said it again. Contact deals. Why do I keep saying contact deals?
I don't know.
It's just like trying to sell something.
Yeah, I'll do you a good deal on some contacts, Matthew, if you know what I mean.
Let's once more time for the folks at home.
Okay.
In a moment's time, you will hear some contact details about
Yes,
this
you
podcast, as well as information about our fundraising campaign or crowdfunding campaigns. So until then, why not enjoy the following song by Frenic, You Are the Bomb?
I picked that one because it put to my mind a nice sort of image of this sort of terrorist would-be bomb maker hunting for his explosives to make a bomb, but then the feel-good message at the end of the story is, no, you are the bomb. The bomb was inside of you all the time, Matthew.
That
doesn't quite
dangerous.
sound as cheery as I initially thought, no, now that you put it like that. But nevertheless, let's give it a listen and go out and drink a nice, tall, frosty glass of Red Mercury.
Yeah, and hopefully by next week, your tablet will have resurrected
I'm going to
from the
uninstall some stuff and reinstall some stuff and see if it starts behaving itself. And then if it doesn't, I'm just going to punch it.
Just throw it out a window.
Yep, exactly. That always works.
Yeah. Until then, it's Toodle Pip from me.
And it's Pippletood from me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Matthew R.X. Dentith, and produced by Matthew R.X. Dentith. If you've enjoyed The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, why not contribute to our Patreon or Podbean patron page? And you can contact us on podcastconspiracy@gmail.com. That's podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.